Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to go ahead and acknowledge that we gather as guests on the unceded traditional lands of the Duwamish people who have lived in and been caretakers of the land here since time immemorial. We thank the people of the Coast Salish tribes for their stewardship and strive to nurture our relationships with Indigenous peoples of the Northwest by joining their efforts to work for social justice and to care for this land. Welcome to University Bookstore, and thank you so much for joining us this evening to celebrate this fabulous book, Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. Before we get started, I have just a little bit of housekeeping to go over. By the way, my name is Milo. I'm a bookseller here, and I will be your tour guide to the book world this evening. So first of all, out of courtesy to the author and your fellow attendees, we do ask that folks limit personalization requests to one copy of Immortal Longings. If you have other backlist titles with you, they may be signed, but not personalized. If you have more than 5 items to get signed, we ask that you get 5 signed at a time, then rotate to the back of the line, and get your next 5 signed just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get books signed. I also want to note, if you enjoy tonight's events, you might be interested in some of our upcoming programming. You might want to check out our event with Pierce Brown on August 12th and with Christopher Talin later on November 14th. It'll be on our events website. Here with us tonight is the fabulous Chloe Gong. I love you! You're my queen! I love you so much! Chloe is the #1 New York Times bestseller author of the critically acclaimed Secret Shanghai novels, as well as the Flesh and False Gods trilogy. Her books have been published in over 20 countries and have been featured in the New York Times, People, Forbes, and more. She's a recent graduate. Congratulations. Of the University of Pennsylvania, where she double majored in English and international relations, which I think is kind of the coolest double major. Born in Shanghai and raised in Auckland, New Zealand, Chloe is now located in New York City, pretending, this is relatable, to be a real adult. Immortal Longings, a fantasy epic based on Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, is her adult fantasy debut. Welcome, Chloe. Yeah, Chloe!
If the chairs are too high, I'm always afraid I'm going to topple. So I'm going to be very careful. But if I fall, make sure you get it on video so that
That's the real plot.
Yeah.
The real florist.
It doesn't matter if I fall, just make sure you video it.
Right. So for those of us who haven't gotten a chance to get into Immortal Longings yet, tell us a little bit about this book, its themes, your inspirations.
Okay, can do. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll make sure to project. Immortal Longings is the first in a trilogy. It is inspired by Antony and Cleopatra. And by that, I do mean Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, the characters, the toxic, codependent situationship characters. We love 2 people who are going to ruin each other, essentially. It is set in the Twin Cities of St. Arb, which is based on the Talin city, which stood in Hong Kong during around the 80s to the 90s before it was eventually torn down. But it is fantasy, so it follows a world where people can swap bodies as easily as you can change clothing. Follows a criminal princess who, she's trying to kill the king, down with the monarchy and all that. But she is trying to win a set of games where if you are the victor, you basically get a personal audience with the king. It's a bit of a recluse. The only reason that, the only way that she can achieve her goals is to win these games. Then there is a exiled aristocrat, Antony, who wants to win these games for monetary reasons. His childhood love is in a coma. He's like, I gotta save her and I need money. However, when Antony and Cal start working together to try get to the end of the games better, they start getting entangled with one another, as what happens, when you're Antony and Cleopatra archetypes. And eventually, Calla's gonna have to decide what is more important to her kingdom or her lover, because she can only have one.
The catch-22 of all time.
Exactly.
So I love the work you've done in this space of reinterpreting and reinventing Shakespeare's plays in kind of fantastical settings or with these different dynamics. What is it that calls to you about Shakespeare in particular?
Well, I was a Shakespeare nerd in high school. I think all the best Shakespeare nerds are kind of grown in those English teacher classrooms where like you so desperately want to impress your English teacher. There are a lot of us out there like that. And that was exactly where I got my origins, where I was reading Shakespeare and all I could think was, wow, this man really has a way with words. And the man in question has been dead for 400 years, you know? But I kind of accidentally stumbled onto the Shakespeare retelling arena. I had originally wanted to write a story about a blood feud with my YA nephew. It was this kind of historical, like two gangs who've been killing each other for, you know, generations, and then suddenly their kids are in love. And then I thought, no one is going to hear that pitch and not say, you just wrote Romeo and Juliet. Like, that's already been done. So I was like, okay, fine. I'll do a retelling. I'll actively engage with the fact that the story has been told before, because I'm not trying to come up with something completely new. I'm trying to take something existing and add my own lens over it. I'm trying to add, you know, aspects that I think are much more applicable to this current day, to a new generation, and yet still have those like old good themes. So very much the same thing with Immortal Longings. I had debuted into young adult with Romeo and Juliet, just such a tale of like youth and love and hope. And then Antony and Cleopatra is like adults being power hungry and battle driven and mad with, you know, lust and all that. So I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I think for those of us who have had that Shakespeare nerd experience, was me, and I'm sure is many of you, there's just something about the way he engages with kind of the human psyche,
Yes.
and these human relationships that just feels so alive and of the moment, kind of no matter when you are. And I'm kind of wondering, kind of along those same lines, as you reinterpret these stories that are kind of canonical, a lot of people grow up with them, what is it like to work in the space of a story where some or even most of your audience might have a really strong expectation for where the narrative is heading?
I think it's that from the get-go, I have to be clear with myself what I'm willing to part with and what I'm really, really near and dear to, right? Because when you do a retelling or anything that's inspired by a classic, there are going to be people with opinions about what that classic is actually about. Sometimes people are going to disagree. It's why academics have beef with each other all the time. Like, there are always constant, like, one academic response to another being like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, and so on and so forth, and they have citations and all that. And, you know, when you're writing a novel, it's a little different because whatever I've interpreted as the core of Antony and Cleopatra is what I'm going to end up, you know, circling around when I'm writing this book. So I had to set out being very clear with myself that the thing I love most about this classic is the relationship and the character study, which means when I write this book, it is largely the character study that I've taken from Shakespeare, and other things I can kind of pick and choose what I adapt, which I think shows in the world building because I've put them in a very different space to, you know, the Roman Empire that was in the play. And yet bits and pieces of it I've still taken to inform my world building because I feel like that makes it richer without being, you know, necessarily married to the same kind of like, okay, we're gonna redo Antony and Cleopatra and do it in this certain time period that Shakespeare did it in.
Yeah, and these characters are electric. I think this is something a lot of us have seen throughout your body of work, and they have this momentum towards the goal they have in mind. They feel with their whole hearts. They conceal their identities and double cross. And I would just love to hear about your process of character creation, especially as you make these characters who are kind of weaving in and out of different identities, in and out of disguise. Like they're complicated and morally gray. Where do you start with a character like that?
Well, first I'm blushing. Thanks for saying such nice things about my characters. I tend to start with what archetype they are. And I think that comes intuitively with Shakespearean retellings, because that's the most interesting thing to me about the reinterpretation. It's as if I'm putting the original characters and dropping them in a new setting. The way that I always talked about these Violent Delights, my YA debut was I've just taken Romeo and Juliet's characters and put them in AU fanfic 1920 Shanghai. Like that's how it would be tagged on AO3. It would just be a category and go 1920 Shanghai AU, right? Exactly the same with Immortal Longings. I think it takes these characters that Shakespeare has built, because that is what I love the most, and I put them in a new setting. I put them with different goals, desires, motives, relationships, and that changes them as characters. But at the core of it, I am still most interested in that like OG archetype that I pull from. So with characters like Calla and Antony, they have clear goals, but they also have warring desires, if that makes sense. And what that looks like is I have a lot of fun kind of moving their arc from what do they believe in the beginning and what will they end up believing at the end. Because if the character arc has been done right, those should be two completely different things. And as it goes on, there will be moments where characters are lying to themselves. There will be moments where the character doesn't realize they're lying to themselves. You as the reader are already anticipating like the drop of the knife or whatever the metaphor is. You know, the guillotine? I don't know. Either way, it is so fascinating to me to get to like sketch out the movement before anything. And then as I'm building it, it does take like several drafts. Like usually the first draft of these characters are like completely flat. They're two-dimensional because I need them there first. I need to see how they speak to each other. And as I develop the book, I'm also developing what the plot looks like, how the dialogue is changing between the chapters. And only then, once I've seen it in its two-dimensional form, do I actually identify the pieces that I'm like, okay, if I raise this, if I dip this, it becomes like three-dimensional.
Yeah. Kind of a nerdy little question for you. Do you write to music or use music in your writing process? And because I was desperate to know the answer to this question while I was reading this book, do you have songs you associate with Calla or Antony? If they have tragical playlists together.
Absolutely. I write with music all the time because I find that if I have things blasting my ears, I pay less attention to like distractions. I'm an easily distracted person. I also write in public. So I'm always at the cafe, like mouthing along to the words I'm putting down. If I have music blasting, it helps focus me. Calla's theme song would be "I Am Not a Woman, I'm a God" by Halsey.
Oh, that's such a good choice.
Right. It's just when that album came out, I had already written the first draft of this book, and I was like, me and Halsey are like this.
I'm pretty sure she stole this concept from you.
Right.
Where are the royalties?
We were on the same wavelength when Halsey came out with oh my god, the Hopeless Romantic Kingdom, because that was exactly along the lines of Romeo and Juliet and his life. So I think we're on the same wavelength. All to say, the entire "If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power" album definitely captures like Calla and Antony. There are just so many themes about like there are things I myself want that don't align with what you want, and yet though I want your love, I want power more. It's just so tasty.
That is extremely delicious. Those delicious, crunchy songs and choices. A little bit related. You end paragraphs and chapters, or have characters say these lines that I can only describe as bangers. Just these gasp-inducing verbal punches. I think you guys know what I mean. The kind of thing you read, you're like, no. Is it as exhilarating to write those as it is to read them?
Absolutely. I think I thrive off of knowing that readers are reacting to bits and pieces I put down that I was reacting to as I was writing it. Because, this goes back into the whole reason of why I even want to be an author to begin with. For a very, very long time, I just called myself a writer because I would write books and I didn't show anyone. I kind of just put them in the drawer and I was content to just tell myself stories. But I think the difference between being a writer and being an author is that an author is in pursuit of an audience constantly. It's not enough to just write your book. It is also in constant dialogue with the readers and their reaction. And when someone completely gets what I'm trying to do, they've added that experience in. They've made the story something more because they've added that level of connection where it's like our brains are just, you know the meme where it's like clown to clown communication? That's me with like my complete niche target audience. Like they finish reading it and they react exactly how I held the story in my head, and then it feels as if I've opened that world to you guys. So yes, I really do enjoy it. I love seeing the, when people tag me in things online and it's just a complete blurry selfie of tears. It's great.
In their moment of
Yes.
book induced
It's great. It's so great. It feeds my soul.
Yeah, so speaking of readers and different readings, I was reading some of the blurbs and reviews, and Renka Aoki, who wrote Light from Uncommon Stars, which is such a great book, described this book as a tour de force of Asian futurism, which is this description that kind of traces its lineage back to the idea of Afrofuturism, like combining history and the fantastical to like explore experiences and identities. How does that term resonate with you? And like, did you write with a kind of concept of Asian futurism in mind?
I didn't really write with the concept of any genre, and it has actually been very enlightening to see what different genres people end up placing this book in. I've gotten Asian futurism, I've gotten like cyberpunk, I've gotten different aspects of fantasy and sci-fi, which is very, again, enlightening to me because officially by the publisher, it's classified as a fantasy, right? Marketing talk will call it like an epic fantasy debut. And then it's kind of like, it's really, really hard actually to classify this book into a genre. Because when I write, I kind of just enjoy mashing genres, and that is a publisher's worst nightmare. If they can't just say exactly what genre that is, it also means it's very hard to put it in a specific shelf on the bookstore, because, bookstores are, divided by genres.
That's why we just have to put it on staff favorites.
Exactly. I'm like, if I have a genre, I need to be right there. But I wanted to follow enough fantasy conventions that ultimately I was happy with being labeled a fantasy, because a lot of Immortal Longings is this interrogation into why do we have certain fantasy, I guess tropes is the best word, of the lost princess rises from a life of obscurity and reclaims her lineage, or the good king replaces the bad king and suddenly all is well, even though ultimately you look at these stories and it's like you just continue the cycle of imperialism, right? A lot of the intent of the trilogy is to build book one as if we're about to retell that story, and then things start to pivot, things start to actually go into, is that true though, or actually is this whole system and institution broken, and then characters need to realize it at the end of this book, etc., etc. But because I am easily bored when it comes to writing like one storyline, and I will end up genre matching to keep myself entertained. And I hope that also keeps readers entertained if they're the type of reader that I am. So there are so many like sci-fi aspects to this, including the body jumping, including an interrogation of identity, and etc., etc. So whatever genre label I end up getting, I'm always just happy to be here.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating, I like the description cyberpunk too, is one that kind of came up as I was reading it. And just the idea of this world where you could embody a completely different. Do you mind if I read a little quote that I'm super excited about?
Please.
So you have this description of Calla thinking, and she thinks Calla is a woman in the same way that the sky is blue. She understands that it's the easiest identifier to slap on, and she doesn't mind it. But in actuality, the sky is an incomprehensible void. Before anything else, Calla is just Calla. And I'm wondering I want to hear all about this world building, kind of starting from what is different about how people think of themselves and identity and their own selfhood when you could just that easily be embodying someone else's physical form.
I'm really glad that you read out that quote because I was really proud of it. That was so good. That was just me like putting myself into the page, and I think that's why I think a lot about these concepts, right? Because the real world that we're in confuses me a lot, where we have to have this binary of what we are, and then there's all these societal aspects that come alongside it. And I wanted to imagine a world where that just feels less important. It's not that it doesn't exist per se, because in all aspects of nature, sure, there's a division of sorts, and yet it's just so much less important, especially for these characters, because they're on a spectrum of I don't mind it to I really don't mind it, as opposed to identifying one sort of way. And of course, a lot of these like interrogations into what does it mean to be human is a science fiction aspect. I really wanted there to be a magic system that didn't feel like magic per se. It was just a way of life. It is how people are born into this world, and they have a gene where they can swap bodies with people. Not everyone has it in this world, and there's a lot about it they don't understand it yet. There's a lot of their history that's been lost. There's a lot that I've left for book 2 and book 3, where you start expanding into what this entire kingdom has been lying to them about. But ultimately, I wanted this aspect in the book as something kind of critical to who these characters are, because if you have been raised in a world where this is normalized, that is just also a way that you see other humans and other interactions and how it informs the world. So, a lot of it goes into the world building that has started getting set up, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. I say see where it goes as if I don't know, but like see where it goes.
I had so much fun while reading that. I think that the people who were around me while I was reading this would agree that I was like, how do people do taxes? How do they vote?
That's why the world building is so chaotic. It's just one king, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, that sucks.
Yeah, it's such an interesting world. And there are parts of it too, though, that are a lot like our world. Like, one of the motivators in this world of one of our heroes is healthcare debt.
Yes.
And there's this issue of sort of like enforced urbanization. Like, how much of that comes from like things you're seeing in our world?
I like to think that when any fantasy world is built, it is inherently political. It is inherently informed by what you see around you and what you find to be, something that you find valuable to interrogate. And a lot of it comes from both, Western healthcare or maybe healthcare in other parts of the world that you see flaws in, but you also see there are nuances to the way that different societies do things. A lot of the world building behind Immortal Longings just comes into what do you want on a human level, right? It is so, I really wanted it to be a character study first and foremost, is what does Calla want? What does Anton want? What does Lucas want? And Anton, who is trying to get out of debt essentially because he's been keeping someone at the hospital for years and years and years, is so single-minded and that focused that the world building slowly reveals around him as opposed to being delivered to the reader straight on. And I tried my best to make it so that it wasn't like, and then he's going to talk about things that he wouldn't actually know. It is all so much informed by things he's been like constantly thinking about. If the page delivers it to you in one go, or if it delivers it to you later, it's those things that he can work on like as he encounters it. But yes, a lot of it is definitely, I think fantasy world building and our modern day society is going to constantly be like dialogue.
I really liked what you said earlier too about this kind of cycle of imperialism, the cycle of repeating, like of violence, feeding violence, and that being kind of a theme reflected on here too.
Yeah, it is one of those things where as the world kind of like plays out, I wanted the reader to think about like, actually, are these protagonists doing what they think they are doing? Mm-hmm. Because I think so much of, this cycle of either violence or suppression, there's always going to be these instincts of like, I can save it, I can help it, etc., etc. But then you kind of think like, okay, the three characters in this book, a princess, an aristocrat, and a prince. Can they really do much? Or do they all actually have to fall for a system to fall? And Antony and Cleopatra is a tragedy. That's all I'll say.
Chilling. 2 more books to come.
It just gets a little on the edge of the seats,
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Me too.
Just kind of a talking shop question about your writing routine. So you just finished as a student this year?
No, 2 years ago now.
2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm slowly removing myself from the trauma of that.
Oh, geez. It takes more than 2 years of recovery. For sure.
Really does.
So what does your writing routine look like, and has that changed a lot since you graduated?
Oh, absolutely. I am still carrying the trauma of being a student writer, where I instinctively write during the nighttime hours still, because when I was, a student still, the hours of like 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. was reserved for like essay writing. Then I would finish and I'd be like, time to relax with some novel writing. And I would just write until like 2 a.m. Very unhealthy.
When did you sleep?
3 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm kidding. I did get more sleep than that most times. But it was a very, very intensive schedule when I was a student. Because pursuing like publication was something I was really, really intent on. I had a story with These Final Slides, which was my first published book, and I wanted it out there. I felt like it was ready. And so that also meant I had to keep myself very, very disciplined and almost treat novel writing as another class. So that just meant I just had a lot on my plate at all times. Ever since graduating, I've had an identity crisis because I'm like, if I'm not constantly busy all the time, who am I? And what good am I doing in this world? You know that kind of like pressure to just constantly be productive? That's me, to a T. So, since graduating, I've had to set very firm boundaries with myself and be like, okay, I'm only gonna write from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. or something like that, so I don't burn myself out. Because if I do end up using like every single waking hour to write, because I'm a full-time author now, I'm eventually going to lose the steam to write because the brain is an organ. It needs rest time. It needs time to go live life and do things and have fun. So it's what I tell myself to make myself feel better. But I am a workaholic.
It's understandable, especially after all that time as a student having to kind of cram everything in. Yeah. Do you have anything that you specifically liked? So imagine you've just written a gnarly, bloody, tragic message, and you need to get a little. You need to have some fun.
Yep.
Remove yourself from the grind. What is your go-to activity?
I enjoy that you said, imagine you just wrote a really gnarly scene and I go, hee hee.
Oh, gosh.
Well, I live in New York, so I like walking Central Park. I go there a lot. I also I go to bars maybe a bit too much. I drink maybe a bit too many cocktails per week. So that I indulge in drinks. I'm past 21 now, I can say that. It's also my adult debut, I can also say that. I'm so used to young adult where I'm like, whoa, alcoholism! And then I'm like, wait, there might be parents in this audience. Yeah.
Speaking of which, as this is your adult debut now,
yes.
have you noticed any major differences in like writing the book, in marketing the book, in like taking the book through publishing? How has that been different?
Absolutely. Well, now that I'm marketing an adult book throughout this entire tour, I've just been making pagan jokes at every stop. See, I got scattered laughter here, which means I don't know. It has been a lot of fun because I think with adults, you have a very broad range of like aspects and topics that you can just delve into without being afraid that you've steered too far from what is like, relatable for teenagers. When I'm writing young adult, first and foremost, I'm writing for teenagers. I'm writing for the teenager that I was and the types of stories that I wanted to see. And a lot of the times that had to focus on like coming of age, like narratives, because that was the most interesting. I just think about like either this idea or other adult ideas I've had, if I gave that to 17-year-old me, I would be bored out of my mind. Like, I would not read it. And so it is very clear to me that adult and young adult do have different audiences. There is a very big crossover, I think, especially because I label this like new adults, even though that's kind of like gone now. But it is very applicable to people in like their older teens where they might be into that story. But at the end of it, you know, it is very like fascinating to me what themes and questions that the different age categories ask.
Yeah, I do kind of like that categorization of new adult. Even I'm not sure if it's gonna like catch on as like a place I physically shelve books, but like I want it to because it's such a specific time of life, right? And these questions you're asking, like, who am I? What are my priorities? What does this world need versus like what do I want?
I feel like new adult is such a specific like niche where you're past the young adult questions of like, who will I become? New adult is kind of like, I have become my own personhood and where do I go from here? It is still that like era of confusion where you have your life in your hands, you have a bit of power, so to speak. You know, fantasy and contemporary, like that power can differ for what it is. Sometimes it's like financial freedom, sometimes it's like a sword in your hand, right? But it is still that like newness to the world. I feel like maybe love that.
Yeah, I definitely, and you can see that Calla starts out with she's living with roommates and her cat. And
her cat! I love her cat.
Who I love.
Yeah,
the cat say a word about her cat.
Like her cat is a complete like insert. So I have vowed to never like write in characters based on anyone I know. That's a very tricky ground with people getting offended when you kill them off. But I wrote my cat, Mau into Immortal Longings. He's just existing there and it's him. He's gonna be alright throughout the entire trilogy. I would never So I promise this is not a spoiler in the slightest. He's gonna be perfectly fine. So you know, he's just gonna be across the 3 books. There's no plot reason why he's there. I just wrote it in because I could.
That's fantastic. Tell us a little about the real Mau.
The real Mau is very fluffy. He is described in the book as white fur with a gray face. Very recently, the real Mau got a bit of like a skin rash because he kept licking himself because his fur got a bit too long. My mom took him to the vet. He got shaved, and he was a really ugly cat for a very long time. So he was just naked and had fur boots and that little tiny tail. But then when his fur grew back, he was a gray cat. I didn't know that was possible. But now, real Mau doesn't match the description.
He's taking on a life of his own.
I know. He's like, I don't want to be like your AU insert. I'm gonna
All right, I have kind of one-ish more questions before we start turning it over to the audience. But so we're set here within a deadly game where these competitors are kind of fighting each other until the last standing person gets an audience with the king. If you were a competitor in these games, what would your strategy be?
Oh, great question. Okay, I think my strategy would be hiding. Realistically, I know that I'm not very strong. I can't open any of my jars in the kitchen. I do have to get the knife out and like get rid of all the air in it first, like get rid of the vacuum seal, and then I can open it. So I understand where my weaknesses are. I think I would be a hider because, you know, in these games, a really important thing is that you just have to check in every 24 hours because once your wristband is like unactivated, you're out of the games. However, they also have these things called pings every day, where if you're in the vicinity of another player, they're going to send that player to you. At a certain point in the book, Calla can't hide at home anymore because if a ping goes off and her wristband leads someone there, they're just going to stake out her like apartment until they kill her. So I would be one of those, like, I jump from place to place, not like actually jump buddies, but like I just dart around the elevators from place to place. And then every time one of those things go off, I just like run for it, book it somewhere else. And then I would just keep doing that until, you know, eventually we get to the final 2 and then I would die in the arena. Yeah. I can acknowledge my weaknesses. So coming number 2 wouldn't be bad. I'd still be dead and get no money, but it's a dignity thing.
I think we ran unless your competitor was a pickle jar. Fabulous. So with that, if you're up for it, I think we can start opening the floor to hear a little from our audience. So if anyone has got questions, I will come to you with the mic and just give us a little raised hand.
Who was your favorite character to write in Immortal Longings?
Oh, great question. I would say Mamal. I don't think he classifies himself very much. Again, because he has no character arc, really. He is just there as set dressing to be cute and fluffy. So I can't actually say that. I think my favorite character to write was August, because there is so much cognitive dissonance in his character. There are some chapters that he is narrating, and he's like, I'm gonna be such a great king, I'm gonna spread my education and culture, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes we'll switch chapters, and then someone will be like, August is a tyrant, actually. And it's really fun, I think, as an author, to be able to press at those little bits that readers have to be patient with, because, you know, who's the one telling the narration in a way that's not skewed? Probably not August, given the evidence on the page, but he is still like my favorite character to write. He is likable because he's so like off the rails to me.
This might be microphone feedback, so if it does,
Okay.
it can be a little.
Okay. So jumping bodies. I had no idea that was a thing about, but that makes me so excited. So what like inspired you to add that into the book? Because like I love the idea of jumping bodies, very low key, which I like absolutely love. So like, where did you get the idea? Was it something that you had in mind when you like planned the book? And like, why you chose that?
Okay, great question. Two branches of an answer. The first branch is that I needed an aspect like body jumping because a core thesis of the book was an exploration into the identity you're born in being something that either aids or like steers you away from like your role in a fantasy world. Primarily with Calla, because she is this criminal princess who kills her own parents and is now trying to go after her uncle to take down the monarchy. But then the book is always asking these questions of how does she wind up here anyway? And would she be successful in doing what she thinks she wants to do, et cetera, et cetera? And I needed a system that put that into place. Try to be vague, so I don't want to give spoilers, but there are a lot of like moving parts of we need lives to be that like, for some reason the only word I can think of is intangible, but lives need to just jump in and out like this because it ultimately comes down to this idea of, you know, who are you really? Are you the body? Are you the soul? Are you the status symbol in society? And then second branch of that answer is I was watching Altered Carbon on Netflix, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's a science fiction show where people's consciousnesses can be consciousnesses. I've been on tour for a week now, so my brain is not working. People can download themselves essentially onto a little chip at the back of their neck, and then that chip can move around to clones of their bodies. Rich people can just never die. And as I was watching that show, first of all, that show has a techno-orientalism problem. I'm not going to dive into that, but I was really, really fascinated by that storyline. I really actually love what they're doing, but I had further questions of what would happen if you could actually just invade other people's bodies? How does that change the way you perceive yourself? How does that open up that society to just complete disruption? So it was in part inspired by that, because if I hadn't watched that show, I wouldn't have come up with kind of like a more altered magic system, which is why the book has sci-fi-ish feelings to it. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay. I'm wondering, since this is focusing on this trio a lot throughout the book, but there are some characters we're seeing, like Artist Guard, who are also playing somewhat of like a family storyline throughout it. What is a character that you think, that like a side character that you found you didn't expect, but along the way you want to explore them?
Oh, great question. I mean, I have an answer, but I don't know if this is a bit too spoilery. Okay, I won't say their name, but there is one side character who you see come into the narrative quite late, although they do occupy a space in the entire book. They are a big motivator of the main character. I'm being so big. This doesn't make no sense. This side character is a big motivator of one main character. And the side character, comes into the narration very, very late in a way where like, oh, okay, she brought her in. Oh, God, I gendered her. Okay. Oh, look, she brought this person in because they're going to play like a part in book 2 and book 3. I'm really excited for that because, if you know your Antony and Cleopatra, I think that is the storyline that I'm referring to is the bit that I wish that play had spent more time with rather than not actually, like the play doesn't have this character in it at all. She's mentioned as a person who's just off in Rome, like while all the men are like at war and stuff like that. Okay, I'm almost scrolling. But so far, I'm on like the first draft of book 2 right now, and this character has just created complete chaos wherever she goes. So it's a lot of fun. I'm really excited for people to like actually meet her.
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So I've become a recent nerd of college and having to read so many Shakespeare works. So I'm curious as to what other works, because you've shown Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra, what other works have you been really interested in from Shakespeare?
Mm-hmm. In high school, we studied Hamlet, which I'm very intrigued by, but I don't think I would ever do a retelling of because I would just be really frustrated by having to reinterpret Hamlet's constant monologuing and not doing anything. So that play is very enjoyable to me, but I probably could never work with it. I think at the moment I've worked with my top 3 favorites. My ranking of Shakespeare plays is Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra, and As You Like It. And I've done it for all of my series. So maybe one day I'll find a new fixation with a Shakespeare play. But for now, I'm happy with what I've done.
So, hello. So, you mentioned AO3 earlier. You want to drop the handle, girl?
Yes. The funny thing is, I was actually never on AO3. I was on Wattpad, which is objective
Oh. One more thing. Words are hard to get.
Words are hard, don't worry.
Short answer. I think I might have a short answer on why the lost princess archetype is so popular. Google Anastasia Romanoff.
Grand plot to me.
Hello.
Hello.
Your books have an incredible world building and just insane historical just wonder. And your background in international relations, I'm a poli-sci major, so I'm obsessed with IR. What are your ethics when world building in a historical place, the time period, your figures, and how does your background play into that?
Oh, great question. And you only knew to ask that question because of your poli-sci, so I feel you, I think so much of the stories that I end up revolving around will always have a international relations aspect to it. So often I am more interested in the kind of larger, higher aspects, the way that powers are balanced or bandwagoned and so on and so forth, than the actual how a lot of fantasy is more about civil revolt and those domestic affairs. I really like the influence of external powers and things like that. I think you see it less so in this specific book actually, but with a lot of my YA, it's about grappling by foreign powers and by invaders. What does that do for the local people? What is that, how does that play their hand for their personal relationships and their personal goals and motives and stuff? Of course I would say that, and then the more I think about it, but the Immortal Longings really is about the domestic side, but of course it leads into a space for later in the trilogy where you suddenly expand out into the world. You suddenly look at why is it that there are aspects of this kingdom that used to be independent and now it stands as part of this throne? How is that going to affect the characters? So yeah, I really enjoyed studying international relations. I think it did more for my like writing focuses. Is that a word? Focuses, I think it is. Than like my English degree. My English degree is very much like what I found interesting. I just studied texts and got a certificate for that. But international relations, it really gave me a basis for writing.
Hi, before I ask my question, I just wanted to give you another jar opening tip. If you take a washcloth and hold it over the top of it while you try to open it, it does wonders.
Okay, noted. Thank
Single
you.
woman living alone. And then my question is, out of all your books, who is your favorite character to write and your least favorite character to write?
Okay. Oh, great question. I think. See, it's so hard to answer this question because it's like picking favorite children. It's like they were all my favorites to write for different reasons. That's always my cheat answer. I think maybe because my mind is on it now, since after the promotion of this book, I need to turn to Valhalla Huntsman, which is like the finale of the YA series. But I had a lot of fun writing Rosalind, I think, because she's actually, when I really think about it, she's the character I have spent the longest with. Yes, Roma and Juliet get the entire linear timeline of going from when they were 19 to last one Cole when they're 24. But Rosalind is the one who appears in chapter 1 of these novels. She's the one that gets the downward arc of oh, you fucked up and now you're in your mistakes.
Yeah.
And then she gets the complete upturn of actually no mistake is bad enough that you can't recover from it, especially as a teenage girl. She's just a 24-year-old teenage girl. She's 19 actually. She's frozen in time, but all intents and purposes. So yeah, I think she's my favorite just because it's so healing to get to write her arc through Valley of Fortune and Valhalla Huntsman, because I think so often we don't give characters the space to completely mess up and then to get their own duologies to realize that things can actually get better, etc., etc. And then least favorite to write, maybe. See, I don't have a least favorite to write because I have fun with all of them. I'll say Tyler from the first duology, not because I actually disliked him, but because I had to constantly skate a line between not making him cartoonishly stupid, but he also needed to be stupid enough that it's oh, you're such a dude. At the same time, you also want him to feel sad when I'm not gonna say anything because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it yet. But you also want to empathize with where he then ends up. So because there's so much to juggle, I'm that was hard, but I feel good with what came out of it.
Hi. So you have so many vibrant characters through your books, and I guess my question would be, do you think there's any characters from these Violent Delights or Foul Lady Fortune who wouldn't get along with characters from Immortal Longings?
Oh, great question. I'm so sorry. I think I choked on my spit before, which is why I keep about to cough. I'm really swallowing my spit, don't worry. I think on a very meta level, there was one point in the first few drafts of Immortal Longings where I was sitting there thinking, Calla feels very similar to Juliet. And I had the possibility of maybe altering it a little so they didn't feel as similar. But then ultimately I was thinking, that actually makes sense. Given their inspiration points, given Romeo and Juliet as foundational archetypes, given Antony and Cleopatra, I was that makes sense. I actually think describing Calla as Juliet on crack cocaine makes sense. So yeah, Calla and Juliet, they'd be friends. If so long as they don't have different goals, they'd be friends. I think Roma and Anton would not get along. Just because Roma's just so straight-laced, and Anton is like chaos on legs. But Anton and Orion would get along. So yeah.
I just wondered, did you have a childhood inspiration, like a teacher or someone who really inspired you? And then besides Shakespeare, what were you reading and what did you love?
Oh, absolutely. My high school English teacher did wonders, like for my, not only my love for Shakespeare, but also making sure I just understood Shakespeare. I think a lot of people who, go through high school being like, oh my God, the Shakespeare unit again. So often it's actually just because they haven't been given the tools to understand it. And as soon as they have that entranceway in, they're like, oh my God, like love is a smoke made by the female side. That's so so I just, anytime that people are like, why Shakespeare? I'm like, Mr. Randall, he was great. He was so great. And then as for what I was reading, I came of age into teenagerhood with the YA boom. So like the dystopias, the paranormals. I had a Tumblr dedicated to Jace Herondale, for
Jace Herondale.
A lot of Teen Wolf too. But that era of like pop culture, especially with the franchises were ginormous, huge. It informed me as a person. And I think it kind of colors the things I write now too, because so much of what I loved about those books were how like sticky those characters were. You put the book down and they stayed with you after the last page because you couldn't stop thinking about like, oh my God, like when are they gonna get together? Or like, oh my God, I wonder if he's gonna find out who his true father is, or she's gonna find how to unlock that power, etc., the next book in the series. And that is exactly the feeling I want to capture when I'm writing too.
All right, we have time for just about one more question.
Without spoiling anything, the ending is insane, and I think it quite a little. But was it always your intention to like have it end like that, and how was it to write that?
Oh, yes. It was always my intention to end it like that. I think I've kind of built a brand now for like, insane endings when I know there's going to be a next book. Because I'm like, there is a next book coming. Why would I end it nicely for you guys? Why would I wrap things up and put a little bow on it and be like, okay, you can stop reading now if you want. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to end it like, on a cliffhanger. Again, it kind of comes back to the types of books I was reading growing up. Like, I was raised by Rick Riordan.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows, like, the cliffhanger ending of, like, was it House of Hades? Yeah. Margaret and Anita. Yeah, every single book, he ends it, and it's, like, the most frustrating cliffhanger, and actually, you love it so much, because it makes you feel something. So yes, I do love cliffhangers very much, and I'm gonna keep doing them. But with this one specifically, I knew from the beginning that was how that character arc needed to play out, because from when you pitch something as there's only one way it can end, you've got to keep that promise. You can't find some way out of it. And yet, I kind of found, it's one of those things where it's like you will need to, like, without getting too spoilery, you will need to fulfill the promises you set out to do, and yet if you are smart enough, it will still hit the same and also hit even more. And that was the intention, and I hope it hits. I hope it's a banger of a last line.
Let's give Chloe a hand. All right, we're going to start flipping for signings here. I've got some guidelines. First of all, we're gonna call you up by rows. Folks in the back, don't worry, it's not gonna take as long as you think, I promise. But since we fell up here first, it's very orderly first. The line, we're signing at this table, we're gonna flip it for you. The line is gonna go back kind of this way and around. And we do want to make sure we keep the table between Chloe and the person. Lots of touring, want to stay healthy, safe. So, and then we'll also have a person there to take pictures in case you want one of those on your phone. And without further ado, we can start recording. Thank you all for coming. Oh my goodness.